early afternoon to all of you. I am Erica Leone, your Staff Assembly President. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I also want to introduce my co-host for the day, our Director of Professional Development, Sarah Dillon. Sarah's going to give you a nice little wave so you know who she is. There she is. All right, so today we are hosting our campus town hall on UCR's current budget. Our town hall will be led by our Vice Chancellor of Planning, Budget, and Administration, Gerry Bomotti, and our Executive Director of Financial Planning and Analysis, Stephanie Flores. Just a few reminders, we received just under 50 questions that were submitted through the registration process. We will do our best to get through these questions before the end of the town hall. If you have any additional questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A function in the Zoom, and we'll do our best to address these questions after the presentation as time permits. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on our Staff Assembly YouTube page for future reference. Non-panelist attendees will remain muted and off camera during our webinar, just so we have good sound and video. And with that, it is my privilege to introduce you to our Vice Chancellor, Gerry Bomotti, as well as Stephanie Flores. And I want to thank both of them for taking the time to be with us today. They've both been amazing partners to Staff Assembly, and we greatly appreciate you. With that, I will go ahead and pass over.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica, and thanks to everyone joining in on this town hall. I'll give you a little background, and basically, Stephanie and I are going to tag team this presentation. She'll probably be doing most of it, but I'll cover a few of the elements of it there. During we did a presentation like this to the Campus Finance Committee, which you may all know exists and is managed and run by the Provost, Liz Watkins. And so that Campus Finance Committee is made up of essentially the Vice Chancellors, Deans, a number of other people. Erica sits on that as head of Staff Assembly as well. There are members from the Academic Senate and the like. And so we gave that presentation to them to kind of give them a background on our budget, and in particular, the budget model that was adopted in 2016 and was at least initially implemented in fiscal year 17. So after that presentation, Erica suggested, well, maybe campus and the staff broadly would be interested in this presentation. So that's what we put together here for you to kind of go through and give you a little bit of updates and information about our budget model. So let's go to the next slide there. And I'll put this in context for our budget. So if you can see there, we sort of talk about our budget in two pieces. The core budget, and that's really what comes from state funds and tuition. F&A is basically facilities and administration. So that's the overhead we get on grants and contracts and the like. And that's really what's paying our faculty, a lot of our staff salaries that are supporting faculty, and really instruction and the academic activities. The rest of the budget is made up of a lot of different programs. Some are self-supporting degree programs. Some are grants and contracts revenue that's coming in. Sales and services, so that could be basic self-supporting activities, auxiliary programs, so also self-supporting, so things like housing and dining, the hub activities, activities like parking and other types of things like that, where there aren't any state funds associated with supporting them, and they have to generate their own funds. And so you can see that for this current fiscal year, we think will in total be about $1.3 billion in activity. Now, I'll put that into context for the entire UC system. So it's a pretty good sized number, but the UC system as a total is about 50 billion. So that 50 billion is made up of a significant amount of money coming from some very large health science related activities in some of the larger UC campuses. So let's go to the next slide there and kind of put it in context for all funds. So that's our total budget there. And where does the money come from? So you can see there, student tuition and fees is a big component there. General funds is a big component. That's essentially what's coming from the state. And the state provides resources to us for mostly enrollment, our enrollment of resident students. There are other functions that they support, like some of our agricultural operations, our School of Medicine, and some other areas there that aren't directly enrollment driven. But you can see the breakdown of the different functions there. I might highlight one thing here, which I'll bring up again later too. Basically gifts and private donations. So there's a little bit of a technical issue with that. So our gifts come in through our foundation, and they're booked there, and then they're transferred over to the university when basically someone needs to use them for supporting a scholarship or an endowed chair or whatever it might be. And so our accounting here for that shows what was transferred over. It doesn't show what the foundation brought in on an annual basis for gifts, donations, and other things like that. So little context there to make sure there's no confusion. You can see on the right side there, and this is true for all institutions like ours, we're heavily salaries and benefits. That's primarily where our expenditures go. You can see there's a kind of a healthy amount in there for financial aid. So that includes federal financial aid and pretty much everything else, including the university and state and system financial aid funds as well. Let's go to the next slide, which focuses on the core budget. So that core budget, you can see in there, has a similar profile in many ways, but I think it's important to point out that the general funds or the state funding we get is about 45–46% of the budget. And so that's the area that really has the most capability for growth for us. And certainly the state looks at giving us cost adjustments. They don't call it inflation, but it's essentially that. They also will give us money for additional enrollment that we have. As enrollment goes up, periodically they give us additional money to fund that resident enrollment. You can see the non-resident tuition is an important percent, but it's a smaller component. F&A, again, is federal facilities, overhead facilities administration is the technical name of it there. And then you can see student tuition. So that's a big component. Student tuition, though, our board has not been that interested in making significant increases in tuition. You've probably seen the CSU system had a big discussion about that recently, and other campuses often raise their tuition rates for everybody on an annual basis. Our board did approve a cohort-based tuition increase program a few years ago, and basically what that means is incoming students pay a slightly higher rate, and then they get that basically, if you're an undergraduate, you get that basically as the fixed amount that you will pay per year for up to 6 years if it takes that long for you to graduate there. So our growth in that area is not the same as you'd see at other institutions. On the right side, again, you see that over 75% of our expenses are in salaries and benefits. Financial aid is a big component piece there of the core budget as well, along with other expenses being everything else, other operating expenses. Let's go to the next slide there. And what we put together here were basically some graphs of our main revenue streams as a campus. And so you can see there at the top that state appropriations, well, boy, they kind of popped up there quite a bit there recently. Now, I should highlight that that includes both one-time and permanent funding. So more recently, we've been pretty successful in getting some significant one-time funds from the state. We received funding for the undergraduate teaching and learning facility there. We received an increase in permanent operating budget for the School of Medicine. We received some other one-time funding for the School of Medicine for specific purposes. We received one-time funding for Oasis Park. Excuse me. We also received additional funding for our School of Medicine, new building that we just opened. So you see that jumping up there a bit. You see that in the green dotted line, HERF funds. Those are the higher education, basically funds that came in, emergency funds basically for relief during COVID. And so that was a big support for us during the time when the campus was closed down. In total, between financial aid and campus uses, that was about $165 million. So you see a little jump up there in external funds. You can also see in here that some of our auxiliary enterprises like housing, dining, and the like dropped precipitously during COVID. But anyway, you can see that kind of the trends with this. Most of the trends are in general up and positive. Let's go to the next one. So here, this is a kind of a blow up of some of the smaller revenue streams, so you get a better idea what they look like there. So education, sales, and services, you see that dip for COVID. You see some increase prior to that when the School of Medicine clinic operations came on. That gave a boost there. Private gifts, again, the comment I made earlier, I think would apply here, which is that this shows what comes over for the campus expenditure, but doesn't show what's coming in to the foundation as annual income from donor funds and the like there. Let's go to the next slide there. And again, what we're going to focus in on here now is much of what would be the drivers for the core budget. So a lot of the presentation here is focused on that. We do have some other information on the non-core budget, but I'm going to ask Stephanie to kind of take us through these next few slides here.
Thank you, Gerry. So getting into the weeds a little bit more on some of the revenue that we were looking for on the slide before. Our major revenue streams obviously are student fees, which would be the student tuition in the first box and the non-resident tuition in the third box, which are driven by decisions by the regents on approvals and then by campus decisions on enrollment. We also have state funding, which the state funding for UC is allocated to the Office of the President. And then there are different mechanisms used by the Office of the President to distribute those funds to the campus. So it's driven on what the state does provide to the system. And then this is where we talk a lot about our budgeted student FTE. That is a major driver on how the state revenues flow to campuses. And then finally, a big activity of a research university is the contracts and grants, and the F&A is the indirect expenses to perform the activity for contracts and grants. So those are the four main revenue streams for the core budget. And then below, we show the different outflows for those revenues. So all of the base budgets in the orgs are covered by these revenue streams. All of the undergrad and graduate financial aid, all of the salary and benefit cost increases on core funds, the allocations of tuition to the schools and colleges, the F&A distributions. We cover debt and lease payments with these funds, and then any campus-wide projects like the Impact 23 that we just had a couple years ago. We did Banner, and then with UC Path, we have costs associated with that as well. And then there are always special decisions that are made by the leadership team when there's extra revenues, which that hasn't occurred much in recent years. So then just going a little bit more into some of the variables that impact the core budget. These first ones are the core revenue. So with tuition, the campus doesn't have, this is the tuition that's about $12,000 per year per student, and then the non-resident tuition. That covers about 50% of our core budget, but any changes to those require regental approval, and those amounts are the same for every UC campus. On state funding increases, again, that's about 46% of our core revenues, and it's the negotiation between the system and then our state leaders. And a major component for how funding is distributed to the campus would be the FTE enrollment, which is derived from the average unit loads a student takes on campus. And then the both tuition and state funding is driven by student enrollment growth. So the system is looking for our budgeted, how we're meeting our FTE enrollments based on what they've budgeted for us. And then more directly, our student enrollment is a direct change to the tuition that we receive on campus. When this gets deeper into the state funding component. So you've probably heard us talk about the UCOP rebenching model. So this is the calculation that the Office of the President, with consultation from campuses, derived in about 2012, 2013. In that time frame, it's the process by which state funds are allocated to campuses. So there is a component of set-asides at the Office of the President, generally directed by the state to fund very specific programs. So there's some of the funding off the top goes to set-asides, and then there is a formula that distributes the remaining balance of state funds based on the student FTE. And one of the major changes for, we've been getting funding over the last 3 years to achieve 90%, 95% level of the UC average. That is going away in fiscal year 25, but they've instituted a change to weight students from low-income high schools at a higher rate than just 1. Most undergraduate students are 1. This group of students will be 1.5 going forward. And then as far as some of our expense drivers, so every campus is assessed the UCOP assessment. That's how the Office of the President gets their annual operating budget. In fiscal year 22-23, the assessment to UCR was about $21 million. We in turn pass that charge down to campus units. We cover a component from core, and then it's passed on to campus departments based on expenditures. And then we have fixed cost increases. So as the previous slide showed, our salary and benefit cost increases are about 75% of our expenses. And so we use our funding from enrollment increases for tuition and on state funds to provide the budget for salary and benefits on campus. So this is a little bit of a busy slide. We are posting this whole deck on the FP&A website if you want to refer to it later. But this slide is basically to show all the set-asides that UC Riverside has. About 1/3 of our total budget of $350 million, about 1/3 of that is a set-aside, and 235 comes to the campus through the rebenching formula. So you can see some of our larger ones. We have the School of Medicine as a set-aside, the unweighted enrollment is 13.5, and we've got another amount coming this year. And then you can see all the different programs that the state has specifically funded with regards to student basic needs, student mental health, undocumented students, and the like. And this represents just our perm budget. We also have the carry forward and the temp. And then back to Gerry for this one.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to go over this slide here. I've been using and keeping this graph updated for a number of years. I think it has a lot of interesting information in it. I might comment there's a bunch of people I work with that don't like it at all and don't think it has any good information in it, but I'll tell you why I like it. Most of our money from the state comes as a result of enrollment, resident undergraduate enrollment. You'll see up there on the left as the thing unfunded grad FTE FY23, 324 not included. So FTE is full-time equivalent. So for an undergraduate student, that means if they took 45 credits in an academic year, they would be considered one full-time equivalent. If they took less than 15, they would be less than an FTE. If they took more than 15, they would basically be above that. So our funding comes in large part from the full-time equivalent undergraduate students in particular. The state has interest in supporting growth in undergraduate students. They more recently have not had that much of an interest in supporting growth in graduate students. So the campuses, ours and the other UCs, have had to provide support for those programs, you know, through our own means, through our own budget, through other sources and the like. But I think these blue bars show, I believe, sort of the ups and downs of how the state funds enrollment growth. So they don't fund enrollment growth on an annual basis, because some years the state doesn't have much money, and some years the state might have a very good year and they'll catch up. So you can see in fiscal year 13, 14, and 15, our campus had a huge amount of unfunded enrollment. And then starting in 15, 16, the state, and 17, the state started giving us money to cover that enrollment increase that we'd had in the past years. And so these bars now say, okay, then in fiscal year 17, we are about flat we were almost perfectly funded by the state for our enrollment. Then we went down a little bit and then came back up and had funding like in fiscal year 23. We had 1,259 FTE, undergraduate FTE, that were not funded by the state. So then in 22, 23, 24, the state started giving us money. And in fact, in 23 and fiscal year 23 and 24, the state gave somewhere in the neighborhood, I think was $80 million for enrollment growth to the system, which they then parse that out to the campuses. And so now we got a nice amount of money there to cover some of our costs for salary, benefits, and other issues and investments like that. But now we, with some of our decline in enrollment, and this shows 26,669 is the projected fall 23 enrollment. The 3-week number just came out. It's slightly lower, 26,426. So we're down just under 400 head count from last year. So that's a dip, a dip that's larger than we've seen in a long time, really. And so the number of students head count is down a bit. We've been working hard through the provost's office to increase the credit load for our students. So again, if on average our credit load is for undergraduates is 13 credit hours versus 14 credit hours, and you have 23,000 students, makes a big difference if you have that additional average up 1 credit hour per student there. And so they've been working to show students how it's better for them to get out quicker, finish their degree quicker. And basically it's more efficient for our use of space on campus, our housing, and pretty much everything else there. So the part of this also shows that in FY24, we have a bit of a issue we want to track carefully about the fact that we are overfunded from the state at a fairly significant rate right now. 900 FTE is the projection, but we're hopeful that during the year with working on the average credit load for undergraduates, we can basically reduce that significantly going forward there. And so this is something we track, as I say, on a regular basis to really make sure that we understand where we are relative to the possibility of getting additional funding from the state if we're basically have unfunded enrollment, or we may be at risk of losing some money if we are consistently overfunded on enrollment. So that's what this little slide at least means to me there. And as I say, another takeaway is the state gives priority to undergraduate resident students and funding for them. They have significantly less interest in funding graduate students over what our funding level is and has been historically. So I'll give it back to Stephanie.
All right, so then we'll get a little bit deeper into our own budget model with the revenue distribution on the tuition piece. So this is how the funds that a student pays are distributed in the budget module to different components. So you'll see this is the undergraduates, the fees paid by undergraduate students. They pay the regular tuition, which is about $12,000 a year, and then the non-resident tuition is about $30,000 a year. That we first take off a component for financial aid in the blue, and then the rest of the funding is split to the schools and colleges in gold, and then to central resources. Central resources uses the share in gray to fund the salary and benefit cost increases on the campus on core funds. So just two things to call out. We are always looking at our model and how the funding is distributed and looking to make any modifications to our calculations to meet the needs of the campus. So in 1920, the change that was made was the percentage of the undergraduate or the non-resident tuition. It used to be, when we first started the model, it was 70% to college schools and colleges and 30% to central for fixed cost increases. The cost of the fixed cost increases has changed, continues to rise, and so the portion going to central resources no longer covered would allow us to cover the funding of the cost increases, and so the formula was switched. So now 30% goes to schools and colleges and 70% goes to central resources. And so the on the second bar, the gold and the gray will adjust over time. And then in fiscal year 22-23, an additional change was made to the undergraduate formula to implement weighting, recognizing that the cost of instruction for certain disciplines is more expensive than others. The fees paid by the undergraduate students represent a majority of the revenue from student fees. The undergraduate tuition is about $250 million of the total, and the non-resident tuition is about $25 million. Here is a page showing the fees paid by graduate master's students. The graduate master's students are split into two groups. There's the academic masters, and then there are professional masters. On our campus, the professional masters are the School of Public Policy, the School of Medicine, and School of Business. With the academic master's students, the first component is, again, off of a set aside for financial aid. And then the remaining balance is distributed 100% to the schools and colleges. The grad masters are similar. The percentages that were established, non-resident was at 30%, and then grad masters is 33% to incentivize the growth of academic master's programs, and the grad professional masters was 50% because they also do receive a graduate professional fee. And then the last slide on the revenue distribution, often it looks like we don't include the PhD students in the tuition allocation, and that's not quite true. The decision was made that any funding from tuition or non-resident tuition for PhD students would go 100% to financial aid. So we cover the income from tuition and non-resident is about $5 million that we actually realize in real revenue, and that money is turned right around to provide fellowships to graduate students, other PhD students. And then the last two lines show your self-supporting master's programs and the professional degree supplemental tuition. Those are 100%. They go straight to the school or college who offers the programs, and then they are responsible for a set aside to financial aid based on what they proposed to the regents when they established the fees for those tuitions. And then the last slide of our presentation is just to give you an idea of how the core budget is dispersed among the different orgs so that you can see the different size of the different organizations on the campus. Again, the core budget includes state general funds, the UC general funds, tuition, student services fee, non-resident tuition, and in fiscal year 23, we started allocating the F&A. And so I've split the core budget in the units to see the subvention component, and then the part that is in a budget from tuition or the F&A allocation. And I'll just make one more note. We have central resources as one item. We hold funding for salary and benefit cost increases. And so during the year, the balance in central resources is dispersed to the various organizations. And that is it. We can now take.
Thank you, Stephanie, there. And so Erica, we're open for questions or comments or whatever you'd like.
Thank you both so much. That was a great deal of really important information, very valuable. So we appreciate it. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have about 50 pre-submitted questions that Sarah and I will be reviewing with Gerry and Stephanie. If there are any additional questions that you have, please feel free to use the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will try to get to those as well. So the first question is, how is the university doing with inflation, and how will it affect students and staff?
Let me make a couple comments, but I see there was already a question on subvention. Yes, I'm shocked that everyone doesn't know what subvention is. I go on the street, talk to people, they always bring up subvention. They're very excited about it. Most people wouldn't know what it means. It's a term of art here that was devised basically when the new current budget system was implemented in fiscal year 17. It essentially meant that since we set up an incentive model for the schools and colleges to grow and get some tuition funding, that someone had to draw a line to say how much money did they have prior to that point in time. And then what Stephanie does when there are salaries and benefits that are added, she adds that to the subvention part so that she can track what's the plus and minus in enrollment for the schools and colleges. So for most people, if you're not in school or college, it's just subvention is just your core budget. Relative to inflation and the like, there is inflation. The biggest inflation driver we have is salaries and benefits, and that every year is our largest component to deal with. For this year, I think was somewhere in the neighborhood of $26 million of additional incremental costs to cover the core salary and benefits. Certainly there's inflation in other areas. We see it in facilities, and the campus usually provides some funding for utility increases. But beyond that, most of the units are responsible for dealing with what inflation or deflation, in some cases they may have, relative to their ongoing costs. So the campus doesn't have a formula to fund all inflationary areas beyond the key ones we have, which mostly are driven by salaries and benefits. Now, we do recognize some units like ITS have inflationary costs subject to their software and other types of things. Some of you may recall that just a few years ago, the campus made a significant core investment in ITS, and part of that was to deal with trying to get more staffing for them, but also to deal with some of the accumulated cost increases for software and other services that supported the campus in general.
So the next question that was sent in was, how does UCR budget from OP/state sources compare to other UC campuses? And what things impact that funding parity?
So I think I'm going to make this up, and Stephanie can throw something at me if she can find me. But we'll trade back and forth on these in general, unless it's something that one of us would know a lot more than the others. But so I'll ask Stephanie to make some comments on that. She's certainly well prepared to do that.
So the rebenching model is, again, how our funding comes to us. There's weighted enrollments for the different levels of FTE. So undergrad is weighted at 1, and then they had health science students in the model at 5. So that contributes to a big source of some parity between campuses. So the campuses with medical centers and school medicine, larger schools of medicine than us, would receive higher funding. So there's been an exercise over the last few years to look at what unweighted funding has been. And so the 95% averages were established to bring the campuses that had lower funding, that being our campus, UC Santa Cruz and UC Santa Barbara, to be within the range of the other campuses. So I think the system as a whole has gotten a lot better in reducing the gaps between the campuses, and then making adjustments to like the low income high schools. So that would bring a little bit more funding to our campus going forward as well. And then one other component, the state is really interested in having California residents on our UC campuses. And so they recently bought out non-resident slots at 3 campuses. And so that will also bring about a little bit of change in the makeup of the funding at the campuses. Anything else to add, Gerry?
Oh, I think you covered it.
All right. Our next question, if you could please discuss UCR's budget priority on new admin and analyst staff hires and goals for getting UCR to adequate staffing levels.
Sure. Important question, and one that's highlighted in our strategic plan. Certainly, I think most people know that as we track our data, especially compared to other UCs, we are less generously staffed than pretty much most all of the other UCs. Now, it varies depending upon department. Department X for us could be pretty well staffed. Department Y may be poorly staffed in comparison. But overall, when you look at the aggregate data, we can document that we are leanly staffed for sure. As I mentioned, on an annual basis, our fixed cost increases for salary and benefits are a significant component of covering our increased costs there. But we then, I think, are trying to give priority to what are other issues beyond that. And so I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago, as I mentioned before, we provided funding, a significant amount of funding, I think it was $8 million to ITS. And much of that, not all, but much of that went to staffing. And they have been hiring staff and have hired staff to basically better support that particular area. Last year, there was some funding available, and some went to some, kind of general air student affairs and some other areas like that, that also were directed to staffing in general. This year, after we paid the salary and benefit increases, and some of you probably saw from our recent letter Liz and I sent out, we also included $7 million of perm funding to help address the cost increases for our graduate students, which is, an important component of our program here. And so that left a little, not too much money left. And so the focus and the decision there was to invest most of it in central HR, which was pretty much all staffing, as well as some additional funding there for student affairs. I think it was basically student disability services. And again, that addresses some needs in that area. But I think, you know, you could make the case that we're not catching up on the average as quickly as any of us would like. And so that staffing remains an important priority for us as we move forward. I think we did make a commitment a couple of years ago as we approved Impact 23, that we approved some one-time funds for implementing the system, but we did approve some modest funding for the additional staff that we felt was needed to help support that in a reasonable way. I recollect it wasn't a huge amount, but it was about 14 people or somewhere in that neighborhood. So staffing is an important issue. People bring it up all the time. We are leanly staffed, and as I say, it is also highlighted in our strategic plan.
The next question's from our Q&A. Can you please expand on the real estate statement? Will housing be available for faculty and staff?
I'm trying to think if I made a real estate statement, but let me talk about housing. I think you're aware that we've been adding student housing, and we have another project that's just starting construction this month that'll be delivered for fall of 2025. In terms of staff and faculty housing, we have, I don't know, 30 or so homes that we lease out, that we own and we lease out, mostly on a temporary basis as people come into town. Many of them would like to have some accommodation until they can find some other permanent housing in the area as they look around. Housing prices have gone up here in the Riverside area significantly. They're not anywhere near the levels of the coastal communities or anything like that. And so we have not developed, like some of the other UCs have in San Francisco, for example, in Berkeley, and in UCLA. We've not developed a faculty and employee student housing program for physical assets, basically. We do have, for some eligible students, this mortgage origination program, which is a UC-wide program, which, if you're eligible, allows you to basically take out a mortgage at a reduced interest rate over what you would find in the market. So some of our sister campuses, UCI, I think they're looking at investing in student and staff housing because of housing prices in their area in Orange County primarily. But Merced doesn't have a program either. I don't think Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara have, or if they do, it's their small program. So we don't have an active expansion program in that area at this point in time.
Thank you, Gerry. And I think Sarah's co-host there really appreciated that answer as well. So thanks for that. All right, our next question here. What is considered a core service for budgeting? For example, facilities, UCPD, etc.
Yes, that's Stephanie, since I was last.
You were last. All right. I'm thinking that what they're trying to get at is, so the core budget is the resources we mentioned in the state funds, the tuition, the non-resident tuition, and F&A. So the services that are provided on those funding sources are considered core. There are other types of funding that come into the campus that also cover expenses, and that could be contracts and grants, the other types of student fees, the whole auxiliary enterprise. Those are all non-core funds and also provide services. So there is a limitation to the services that can be provided on core. It's a fixed amount of funding. So with regards to facilities, for example, they have a block of funding from core that they can provide certain services, and then there are additional services that they would recharge units for above and beyond what the core budget covers, if there's that demand from the campus.
The next question from our list sent beforehand. What is the plan for funding critical infrastructure repairs and upgrades that don't fit into the deferred maintenance bucket?
So for facilities, yes, that's another area that's a challenge for us. We have a lot of older buildings on campus, some of them maybe in the 60-year range that haven't had major repairs or new systems in there. So we're trying to work as hard as we can to try to catch up on that. We have recently renovated Pierce Hall, for example. By the next spring, we'll have finished renovations of Bachelor Hall. We're trying to do some major work on Spieth Hall right now. We're just starting some work on physics as well. There's a number of other buildings, though, that include Watkins, Weber, a host of others that also need some attention. So we're trying to do our best to try to catch up on some of that deferred maintenance. We submitted requests for the general obligation bond issue for 2024. We're hopeful there'll be a general obligation bond issue on the November 2024 ballot. And although we have in there, we were allocated by the system 210 million, which is about almost 11% of the total 2 billion that they have. And I think it was in recognition of some of our needs in the facilities areas there. So many of the older buildings on campus are included in there to get rehabs, mechanical, electrical, other things like that. So it's an ongoing effort to try to address and catch up on deferred maintenance. I would also say that facilities and Adam Schnurl about a year ago initiated a new program that we've not had here on campus before, but most other campuses I'm familiar with have had for a long time. And that's a preventative maintenance program for our facilities so that we basically maintain them on an ongoing basis, lubricating motors, changing belts, changing filters, a host of other activities, similar in some ways, analogous to what you would do if you bought a new car or you wanted to maintain your current car, you want to change the oil, you want to basically maintain it well, and so you can get more life out of it. So I think that'll help us lessen the speed of increase of deferred maintenance activities going forward. But that also, the deferred maintenance and condition of our facilities is a significant issue that we deal with on a regular basis. It impacts the entire campus. It impacts students that are in class labs and also in classrooms. I think on a weighted basis, certainly CNAS probably sees these needs at a high level, and maybe Chaz second in terms of weight on that in some of the buildings that they occupy and use around campus as well. So it's an important issue. If you were here and could look at my whiteboard, I have lots of building names up there related to current activities to try to address those needs on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Gerry. All right, the next question is regarding Impact 23. How will the implementation of our new financial system improve budgeting efforts throughout campus?
A perfect question for Stephanie.
Yes, great question. So UC budgeting has a major component of a requirement of tracking and managing budgets. So we get allocations from the Office of the President, and we need to be able to manage where those funds are allocated and keep track of those things. So the first phase in Oracle Budget was to kind of maintain that management of the budget. And the nice thing about our new budget module, which hasn't been released to the campus yet, but is Oracle Budget has a whole component for forecasting and projections, which we have not had in the past. So we will get into that once we start the annual budget process in the spring. And then we will adapt the system to allow for projections and forecasting on an ongoing basis throughout the year. We didn't start that off right at the get-go because we needed to make sure that the budget's converted correctly, that everyone understands how their budgets look in the new system and understands the reporting that's available there. But there's definitely a bright future for what can be done in terms of budgeting with the new system that we have.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Mhm.
So the next question is kind of open-ended here. They're just interested in the 2024-25 budget process and timeline.
Sure. So I think as we have followed in the past, we've already initiated some kind of modeling to look at fiscal year 25. I think many of you know that because of a number of areas in the state that were designated federal disaster areas, that much of the state doesn't have to submit their taxes for calendar year 2022 until the middle of this month. And so the state has been tracking that to get a better estimate of what the tax revenue was because it was delayed from middle of April. So they've been making some estimates. The state did end their session thinking that they could have maybe up to $30 billion deficit going forward. So they wanted to wait to see what came in from the revenue for 2022 taxes. There's a website that you can go look at for California Department of Finance, and you can look at their monthly projections of income compared to budget. They've been doing slightly better this fiscal year than the budget, so that's positive news. So basically, we're kind of tracking things here, a little bit worried about their accumulated deficit there in terms of what that'll mean for early January when the governor comes out with his FY25 recommended budget, which does include all elements of the state government and includes the UC. So we're hopeful that the governor will recommend a 5% cost adjustment. Now, you might remember that 5% cost adjustment on 46% of our core revenue translates into a 2.3% increase in core budget. Our salaries have been closer to 4.5 to 5. So where do we make up the rest there? And so that's some of the things that are worrying probably Stephanie and I and a few other people, maybe more than that on campus. So anxious to see what the governor is going to recommend and what the state outlook for the budget is. And then we'll basically update our models and we'll start working with Liz Watkins, our provost, and probably bring some discussion material to the campus finance committee. And then also FP&A has updates with the CFAOs and the like, and probably start talking about that. The other key time I would mention, schedule in there, is in this case, the November Board of Regents meeting. So the system will bring a recommended budget for FY25, a request that they're going to submit to the state at the November board meeting and ask the board to approve it. One element of that is the salary and benefit adjustments they're recommending for faculty and non-represented staff. So that's a key element as well. For this year, those levels are about up to 4.6%, something like that. Benefits have been going up. They might go up even more. I'm sure all of you have seen the open enrollment material there. And you may not have read the fine print, but in the fine print, the UCOP indicated that they bought down $87 million worth of the employee benefit increases. And so you're seeing those increases net of that 87 million. So I'm suspicious there'll be some adjustments in some of our benefits going forward as well. But that's kind of the general time frame that we get to early in the next calendar year. and that we can have a pretty good perspective then on modeling what can we expect for enrollment. I showed you that graph before. A little worried, want us to catch up on our FTE, so we're not overfunded and at risk of getting a budget reduction, perhaps. So that schedule then probably February, March, in through early June is when we'll find out more details from the state, and then kind of piece together the budgets there. And again, first priority always is salary and benefit coverage, and then what are funds available for other priorities. Liz Watkins really leads that discussion with the campus finance committee, and sometimes she's had calls for budget requests. Sometimes she's focused those, and just like this year, she asked human resources to submit a request. So I think those will be decisions based on data that we'll have from the state early next year.
Okay, our next question. What budget decisions are being made to help improve undergraduate student success and continue to reduce opportunity gaps?
I like this question because it helps to understand our budget model a little bit better too. So I think the obviously the slide that we saw of the set asides, the state has some interest in reducing opportunity gaps by providing very specific funding for certain groups of students, undocumented students. So we get some decisions at the state level that come with funding to the campus that then are passed through to departments that directly work with those groups of students. Then we have in our budget model in the past, we have funding that comes to the center, and we cover fixed cost increases if there's funding available. Then there's money in the central funding that can be used to make decisions regarding undergraduate student success. But with the allocation of the tuition to the schools and colleges, some of that decision making has been pushed down to the org level. So it's not really happening at central anymore. It's happening closer to where the students are, and better decisions can be made. So of the funding from undergraduate student tuition that goes to the schools and colleges, it's split into two components. 75% of it is to cover the cost of instruction, or to contribute towards the cost of instruction. Subvention helps to cover some of that, but there's also 25% that's directed based on student headcount majors. So that would be providing funding evenly to the schools and colleges for the students that they service, and they can use that money for advising other student success initiatives that focus on their population of students. So I feel like we really have a very distributed model now in how decisions are made to improve undergraduate student success.
And kind of on the other side, what is the commitment to graduate education, especially in light of the new grad student contracts?
Sure, important question. One we've been spending a lot of time on since early in the calendar year, and when the new UAW contract models came out. Obviously, graduate students, PhD, MFA students are critical to our mission. Many of them serve as teaching assistants, essentially supporting many of our classes and class labs. Many of them are working in the research labs with PIs and faculty and grants and contracts. They're doing other activities as well, above and beyond that, in supporting instruction and research for the campus. So the decision we made last spring was that we wanted to make sure we didn't have a drop in our graduate student enrollment. So we committed to basically bringing in the same number of students as we've had more recently. And so we allocated $11 million basically of one-time funds to basically increase the base amount we had to reflect the new UAW rates, but to make sure that we weren't going to have a drop in graduate students, or try to prevent having a drop in graduate students. And then as we got into this summer and early fall, we've been working on what's the plan for FY25? Some of you may recall that the new UAW contract ends after FY25. So there'll be another negotiation coming up. So kind of taking it a step at a time. How do we get through FY24? I think that plan there is well understood and has been implemented well and is moving along. Now it turns to how do we get through FY25, because there's a step increase in costs associated with that contract for FY25. So what we've done so far, in the provost and our new dean of the graduate division has basically, they've taken leadership roles working with the deans, the schools and colleges and the like. And so far what's kind of gone out is, again, we want to commit to maintaining our graduate enrollment levels. We want to, in the future, be able to get to a point where we can talk about expanding those graduate enrollments. But right now the focus is on maintaining them and not having them drop. And so what we've done so far for FY25 is we allocated, as I mentioned before, $7 million of core funds. And so that gets thrown in the pot for FY25. We also used it as one time in FY24, but on a permanent basis, it'll go in the pot for FY25. And then we allocated another $5 million of one-time funds to basically help bridge that gap in being able to support the same number of graduate students, but also to be able to support as many fellowship quarters as possible, basically. And so the provost and the new dean of the graduate division is working with the deans of departments so that they can kind of determine on their own what makes most sense for them. Are 3 fellowship quarters? Does that make the most sense in recruiting a student, or is there something else? When we look back at the data from the past, I do see that whereas we offered 3 fellowship quarters, there was inconsistency in how much money we gave people for that. I mean, some were pretty low amounts. So we've committed under the new UAW contract to basically give the same level of funding for fellowships as we do as the base level for TAs. So that's a significant increase in what our students would be getting now from what they were getting before. And again, I think those students did make an argument. I think you could make an argument that we weren't competitive in the funding we were providing to them to be able to live here, get their degree, and all of that. And so there's a commitment there. But in the past, many of those students, when you look at the data, they had a fellowship quarter at the same time they were a TA or a GSR. And I think it makes sense because the fellowship maybe wasn't enough money for them to live on. So they did multiple things. So I don't see it as necessarily a drop in how many fellowship quarters that practically will be supporting. But that's an ongoing area that I think for more work for the provost and for our new dean of the graduate division, working with schools and colleges. But again, the big focus is we're in the short term wanting to make sure we don't decrease our graduate enrollment. And we want to be able to get to a point in the future so we can look at how we increase it. And again, cognizant that in FY26, there'll be a new contract starting, and we don't know what the elements of that might be yet.
All right, thank you, Gerry. This kind of goes back to one of the infrastructure questions we had earlier. Will there be an opportunity in the near future to fund comprehensive asbestos and lead surveys for all buildings on campus?
So maybe I should answer that and not Stephanie.
Sure.
I have a suspicion of who wrote that. I get a note from some people from EH&S on a regular basis. They're good questions. They're important questions. I'm 100 years old and worked at higher education for a long time. And so most campuses, don't have a comprehensive analysis of these things at the detail level. I mean, there's a lot of things that are desirable, but likely not attainable for a lot of campuses. This is one of many. We'd like everybody to have a high level of support for professional development, for a whole host of other things. And we strive towards that, but we don't have it always. So our EH&S people have done an outstanding job in helping us develop this asbestos management system for the campus and being able to add information to it. Now, again, as projects come up with facilities or PD&C, planning, design, construction, basically they're brought in and on a recharge basis, and they work with consultants to basically add information relative to those particular buildings. So it's an ongoing activity. In some ways, it's like our deferred maintenance. We find ourselves where we are, and we need to address our needs there. There's a host of things that I'd like to have changed if we had enough money and time, but it's an important area, and we'll continue, and we're committed to continuing to make progress in that area. And again, we're fortunate, we've got some great people in EH&S. Sheila Hedayati came here just about the time I did from UCI, and I always kid her, UCI has some very good programs, and in particular in EH&S. And so she's put together a great leadership team over there, and they aspire for us to be much better than we have been in the past, which is what we want. And again, progress is being made in all these areas.
What is the current balance of reserve funds for the campus? How is this being used or reallocated out to the campus?
Stephanie's the best one to answer that because she keeps all the cash in a safe in her office. I don't know if you ever visited there. She might let you come look at it someday.
Yeah, it's really, I don't know where it is. It must be in the mouse hole in the corner. So this is an interesting question because what does a person mean by the definition of reserve funds? I think, our campus is very effective of using our permanent resources annually, and then we have a little bit that that goes unspent from maybe open positions, or the program didn't come online as quickly as we thought it would, and so there are cash accumulations. In the current model, since we are allocating funding out, incentive funding out, like from tuition, most of the campus cash balances are pretty distributed across units and orgs across the campus. So the departments and orgs are responsible for managing their funding. We've done surveys for the Office of the President, wanting to know kind of how our cash balances are committed. Our campus is typically very conservative in how we spend our funding, and so our cash balances can be as high as our total operating budgets. But the thing is that those, if you get into the details, it's not reserve funds. They're all committed funds. So we are paying, obviously staffing is a critical issue on this campus. And so we do have many departments who take their cash funds and hire additional staff members so those funds are committed. If we want to keep this person employed for the next 5 years, then I need to have their salary and benefits set aside in my commitments to cover that going forward. So every unit on campus has reserve funds, some larger than others, but we are a very healthy campus when it comes to our cash position. Other campuses, we live within our means. That's kind of the history of this campus. Other campuses recently have started to report structural budget deficits. So they are spending more than their perm budgets are. And thankfully, our campus is not in that same situation. We look at our costs, what our cost increases are going to be for the next year, what funding sources can we put together to cover the mandated increases in salary and benefits, and then our financial staff is very nimble and makes adjustments to, maybe certain commitments that are out a couple years, we have to just let go. That can't be a priority anymore because we have a more urgent need. And so it's an interesting question, but I would have to say of true reserve balances, there's not very much. It's mostly, I would say, like 95 to 99 or overcommitted, the balances that we have.
I might add just one thing there, underscore what Stephanie's saying there, that I think most people will remember we did take a core budget cut in 2021, I believe it was there, and maybe it was 2021 and split into 2022, some as well spilled over there. And we did that after looking at and understanding with COVID and what kind of our projection at the time of where things were going. And so we bit the bullet, took that cut. And as painful as it was, most of the other UCs did not take a budget cut. And so I think, in my opinion, why they have reporting structural deficits now are they didn't take that action. They've accumulated additional costs above and beyond their revenue. And I think they were very hopeful that somehow those issues would be resolved financially, but of course they ended up being compounded. So we again, it wasn't a nobody liked the budget reduction process that we roll out for the campus, but I think it's, in my opinion at least, has helped us avoid some of these same problems that the other UCs are looking at now.
Okay, thank you to both of you on that. Our next question is, how does UCR plan for unexpected increased liabilities, for example, wages and benefits?
So similar to what I was mentioning before about how we look at our core budget, but also the self-supporting and auxiliary budgets. FP&A basically later this month, when they hear about the recommendation for salaries and benefits to the board, they will send out information to the campus CFAOs, including those in the auxiliary areas, about what to plan for. They'll update people on what the negotiated salary adjustments are for all unions as well, so that people have that information. And then basically here, not too far in the future, FP&A again will come out and provide what the projected FY25 CBR rates, consolidated benefit rates, will be, so people can start modeling in their areas. And then we centrally for core kind of track that to say, okay, how much money do we need for that? There's estimates made for things like tenure promotion for our faculty. It's something you kind of have to guess on every year and then true up in the end. So that's an ongoing process that'll be starting here very soon, and really go through next June, essentially there, when we find out what the Board of Regents, what the state approves, and then what the Board of Regents approves for salary increases. In general, when the board takes action in the fall, they put a caveat on it saying subject to the state budget. And so then later, after the state budget is pretty much in focus, they'll come back and talk about whether, yes, we're going to move forward with implementing that proposal that we made in November, the previous November, or, and that's what they did the last couple of years, or they'll make an adjustment to it at that time. So it's something we track on a regular basis, model, and that, since salaries and benefits are such a huge part of our expense and our incremental expense on an annual basis, it's a key part of putting the budget together.
With the increase in master's students, how will we make space in the budget to support their success? Programs, events, services, etc.
So the easy answer to that is those students will be paying tuition, and the schools and colleges will get 67% of the tuition that is generated when those new students come aboard. So those will be decisions that will be made in the schools and colleges, since they will have the funding.
Okay, next question. This is a little bit similar to one we discussed earlier, but a little bit more specific. With the rising inflation and healthcare premiums, is it in the budget for staff to get increases this year?
So the increases for salaries and benefits for fiscal year 24 are pretty much already set, and the healthcare is on a calendar year basis, so it's sort of off the normal fiscal year basis. And so I doubt that there'll be adjustments this fiscal year, although what I mentioned before was the system, in an effort to kind of buy down some of these increases, put in $87 million of one-time central funds that they had. So obviously they were concerned about that, and they wanted to buy those down. As I mentioned before, I do expect that that'll be a key issue because, again, they put in $87 million of one-time money. Chances are that next year healthcare costs won't drop precipitously. They'll likely go up again. And so I do expect that'll be a benefit issue for discussion and adjustment for the 25 budget. So starting next July. I don't know, Stephanie, if you have a different view on that.
I don't.
Yeah. So budget is missing from Looker. When will this be fixed?
So when we deployed Looker, we prioritized the data that would appear in the database. So we the first priority was Oracle financials data, which does include a form of the budget. It does include the total working budget and payroll data, since that data is necessary for units to have access to detail in order to do their monthly reconciliations and reporting. So the data in Oracle Budget, which will actually take the budget data that's in the financial system and show the difference between perm and temp. That data is slated to be in Looker at some point. Banner is next up for loading into Looker, and so my department will work with ITS to see when we are slated to get that budget data into Looker. It will be coming.
All right. A question about graduate tuition. How is graduate tuition paid by faculty grants distributed?
Sure. As you saw from one of the graphs earlier from Stephanie, if you have a PhD student, a graduate student, PhD student, and they come in and they're working on, they're on a fellowship or on paid by for taking a TA position. In essence, there's not a cash transaction with that tuition. They do not pay for it. We appropriately account for it, but there's not incremental dollars. That's not true with a GSR, graduate student on a research grant. That PI does pay that tuition, and that tuition comes to the campus. The campus then moves it over to the graduate division, and it ends up supporting graduate fellowships and other things like that. Basically, dissertation fellowships, basically at the end of some students' program here, some other support like that that's managed through the graduate division. Our campus, in my experience at least, is consistent with the other campuses where I've worked in doing that, because the federal government allows it, and most campuses require that that for outside funding like that, there is a payment associated with that tuition. So that's how we handle it. And the one unique feature of how we handle it is, rather than all that tuition coming into our central general fund, it is driven directly into the graduate division for other support of scholarship type support, if you will, of graduate students.
How will funding help with student housing, and will more parking structures be built?
Gerry, you want to take this one?
So say it again, because I don't, my mind moved to Stephanie's handling this one. Would you repeat that?
How will funding help with student housing, and will more parking structures be built?
We're going to build more of everything. So housing, as I mentioned before, we've increased our bed capacity by 38% since fall of 19. So we've added a lot of housing. We're starting construction on 1,568 new beds up at the North District. It's a project that's a partnership with Riverside Community College District there. And so we continue to see the need for more and more housing. I expect we'll end up building out North District, which was estimated to be about 5,200 beds, somewhere in that neighborhood. Right now, we're not building any parking structures on the main campus or at the North District, but as we get to full build out the North District, that plan does call for a large parking structure, and then kind of the current surface parking will be part of a location for some of the new housing beds there. We did build during COVID, essentially, the parking lot on lot 13 over on the east side of campus. One of the things we've noticed, although it's kind of, I can even see the data, it's changed a bit for this fall, is that the hybrid schedules have had an impact on parking. The lots in general, not all, but many of them have a lot more spaces than they did before COVID. I think that'll continue because I do expect we'll continue to support hybrid schedules for our staff. And that's good for everybody. It's good for them. It's good for us. It's good for the environment. There's less commuting and everything like that. So we'll continue to track to see what needs there are in the parking area. Parking did develop a plan for some other potential locations for future parking garages. One of them, as I recall, was over at lot 6 over there on campus, sort of on the south side there. There were also some potentially over like lot 30 in that area there as well. So, but there hadn't been a decision on the next priority there. But again, there was some relief. COVID brought some relief in the parking competition. And I think it was all related to the hybrid schedules, which I think is a long-term benefit for everybody.
Thank you, Gerry. And I have to give Gerry some props here. He's not only answering the questions live, but he's also answering the Q&A. So thank you for that, Gerry. And because of time, I think we'll end with this last question. Is there anywhere on the campus website to view the 23-24 budget data?
So the provost and VCPB sent out a letter to the campus on some highlights for the fiscal year 24 budget, but also on the FP&A website, there is a page with reports, forms, and allocations, and that has various budget data, including the campus perm budget. There's information about org budget to actuals dashboards, and then information on the different budget model allocations that will be to be allocated out in Oracle budget, since we don't have BEAs, which people are used to querying. So no such thing as a BEA anymore. So we'll have that information on our website. I will just caveat that due to Impact 23 and at going live, there is a little bit of delay with some of the reporting, but that should be a source that you can go to quickly to find current budget information.
That's really helpful, Stephanie. Thank you for that. We have about 3 minutes left. Is there anything further that you or Gerry would like to add, just to kind of summarize what we've talked about, or anything you want to share?
Really appreciate you, Erica, specifically suggesting we do this town hall. I think it can be very helpful for people. A lot of good questions coming in. You know, some of these you could spend hours on individually, almost going through the details, but I think it's always useful to try to educate people about our budget system and our finances, and you know, really have these town halls to allow people to learn more about these things, because most people aren't, you know, every day working in the central budget office, or you know, the central police department, or the central facilities office there. And so they don't know. They make some assumptions, but they do want to have more information, and they do want to have reliable information to better understand how their operation and their activity can be more efficient and integrate in with the rest of the campus. So I want to thank you for hosting this.
It's our pleasure. And thank you so much, Stephanie, as well. You are, you make it understandable. So we really appreciate that because I work for a CFAO and I'm always asking, what does that mean? What does that mean? So we appreciate both of you. And I just wanted to recognize both of you as well. For those of you that don't get to work with Gerry very closely, he's a huge supporter of staff. I mean, the hybrid work schedule, the staff pantry that we've done, staff assembly, all the things that we do for staff. I just wanted to say again, thanks, Gerry, for all your support. You've always been a great partner. So with all of that, just a reminder, everyone, this was recorded. So we will be posting this webinar on our Staff Assembly YouTube channel. There were some questions we didn't get to, so we will try our best to get those posted as well. Thank you all for taking your lunch hour with us, and we're going to go ahead and close with that. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.